I would regard him as a major international figure, perhaps our greatest draftsman since, well, we're talking about the 18th century.
He's my hero, it's still my hero, and it was him, I think, who had the biggest influence on my work.
His eye, it's comic, but it's absolutely penetrating, and just the draftsmanship is utterly superb.
It's the sheer sort of brilliance of a certain kind of linear draftsmanship, which tells you more than 1,000 words.
He really skewers his subjects without in any way actually demeaning them, which is very rare. I think he's just a genius.
He is the cartoonist's cartoonist. He is the cartoonist illustrator's illustrator.
Cartoonists have put a smile on the face of the nation even in its darkest hours. None has done so more successfully than the man widely accepted as Britain's finest, Ronald Searle. In 1945, Britain was exhausted, a country changed by war. This was the land to which the 25-year-old Searle returned, having spent 3.5 years as a prisoner of the Japanese.
I immediately began to rush around and try to earn my living as a freelance artist, and also to find out what was going on in the world, or in Europe at least, while we'd been cut off completely in the jungle or in prison.
Searle's mordant wit and distinctive style were an instant success. By the early 1950s, he was in constant demand, and his creations were even more famous than he was. His St. Trinian's girls lurked on every street corner. His adverts stood 50 feet high in Britain's towns and cities, and his barbed cartoons and carefully observed reportage were appearing in magazines and newspapers throughout the world.
He used to keep a schedule of his deadlines, and it was just unbelievably complex because they were tumbling over one another.
At the height of his success, Britain was described as a Searle-haunted land. His work had caught the mood of post-war Britain and still provides a telling commentary on those troubled times.
But what Searle achieves, a wonderful encapsulation of this post-war period in British life. Very grey period, very stuffy, very hidebound by class division. He doesn't explode that, but he punctures it.
Searle is often described as the most typically British of British cartoonists, and yet it's also a cliché, probably because it's true, that the best cartoonists are outsiders. So how much of an outsider was Ronald Searle? Searle was brought up in East Anglia, a part of the country the artist himself has described as being rather eccentric. Perhaps even more significantly, he began life as a townie amongst the gowns in the gentrified university town of Cambridge. Born on the 3rd of March 1920, Ronald was the firstborn child of William and Nellie Searle. William worked as a porter at Cambridge railway station, and Nellie took in lodgers to make ends meet. As soon as he could pick up a pen, he began to draw. To this day, he credits the foresight of his primary school teacher, Miss Green, for allowing him to use his left hand, where others would have bound it and labelled him cack-handed.
His family were not an artistic family, and he was encouraged by his mother, who spotted his gift for drawing, and there was a sort of tolerance of that, which I think was a remarkable thing, given that his family had no contact or understanding of what possible career he could have.
His father was a fairly formidable character, tough constitution, which came in useful later with Ronald, of course, because he had a lot to survive. He had, I think, something of his father's resilience. He was a local boxing champion known as Buller Searle, which is Sounds very East Anglian to me.
I think it must have been a very pleasant university town. There were lots of original streets, houses, rows of shops, which have now disappeared, sadly. He would have had quite an interesting cultural input from those things, but also contrasting a bit with the fact that his parents had to have lodgers, and there was a lot of pressure on them to, well, I believe he rolled cigarettes. He and his mother rolled cigarettes to actually pack them to make money. So there was this sort of contrast between the modesty of his background and the ordinariness on the surface, and then the rather pleasant, relaxed, grand quality that Cambridge would have had in those days.
Young Ronald and his little sister Olive became inveterate museum goers, haunting the halls and corridors of the Fitzwilliam Museum in the heart of Cambridge.
Ronald in particular wanted to replicate this experience, so he'd built his own little museum at home and put in as many treasured things as he could find. Somebody gave him a grapefruit once, which he'd never seen before. So he put that in the museum, and the next time he looked at it, it was a giant ball of grey fluff. So he had to throw it away. But things like blackbird's eggs, and he would marvel at the blueness of this blackbird's egg and so on. So it's a very typical children's thing to do, but knowing Ronald, it would have been exquisitely done, and each thing would have had something marvellous about it.
It was here in the Fitzwilliam that Ronald claims his fascination with graphic satire was born, in a room devoted to the works of Max Beerbohm.
As a child draftsman, I mean, he drew all the things that everybody does, like the dog or table in the kitchen or something quite mundane and ordinary. But his drawings possessed a greater acuity of observation and reflected an almost, not adult, but certainly mature understanding of how things were made.
On leaving school, Ronald got a job as a solicitor's clerk, but with the support of his parents began attending night classes at the Cambridge School of Art.
His teacher, Miss Horsley, seized on him with enthusiasm because of his dedication, his obvious talent. He was also sufficiently well developed in terms of his reading and his ideas. He'd been to school, he'd done part-time work, he'd done jobs of various kinds, so he was not an impressionable pupil in that sense. He had actually thought a lot about what went on around, so I think he must have enjoyed to teach.
Searle's early perseverance had paid off. Just a few weeks after beginning his night classes at art school, he had his first drawing published in the Cambridge Daily News. It was to be the first of many, as he quickly became their resident cartoonist.
At the age of 15, Ronald, who was not slow in coming forward, dropped a portfolio of his stuff through the editor's door with no further comment, and left it at that. And the editor, to his eternal credit, saw that there was merit in these things and took him on.
Not everyone was so keen. The solicitor's firm sacked him for drawing on their legal paper, so instead he turned to the less demanding environment of the local co-op. Every day he would return from his job as a parcel packer and draw all night. The following morning, Olive would be dispatched to the editor with the night's work, as Searle caught up on his sleep. In 1936, still only 16, Searle broke a Cambridge taboo and became the only non-student contributor to the prestigious undergraduate publication, The Granter.
We really needed a cartoonist, and this kid came along, and, well, we jumped at him. And that was Ronald. I suppose, like any kid of 16, 17, it's a bit of an act of bravery to simply go in and say, will you give me a job, or can I show you my drawings? He fit in very well. I mean, especially as he visibly had a very good sense of humour.
In 1938, Ronald was awarded a full-time scholarship to Cambridge School of Art. He willingly accepted and left the co-op to become an artist. The icing on the cake came when the Searles moved to a new house on Cambridge's Collier Road, a mere stone's throw from Ronald's beloved art school.
To have this flavour around you as well as the flavour of an art school, you can understand that between 15 and 19 there's certain influences which you begin to absorb, which make you start thinking, and which is, if you like, the whole flavour of a university town having its impact on a mind that was wide open, extremely simple, but still rather determined that it was going to become an artist.
In the first months of his scholarship year at art school, the trainee artist took the fateful decision to volunteer for the Territorial Army, Royal Engineers.